The chandelier above the private suite threw gold light across a chessboard worth more than most people's houses. 6 men sat around the edges of the room. Bodyguards, watchers, men who existed only to make sure nothing happened that wasn't supposed to happen. At the center of it all, 2 players faced each other across black and white squares. One of them was Luca Ferraro. The other was a rival family's chosen champion, a man named Aldo Renzi, who smiled like he already knew how the night would end. Nora Vale moved along the edge of the room with a tray of empty glasses, her uniform pressed, her eyes down, her presence engineered to be forgettable. She had learned, over 3 years of working in this hotel, that the most powerful people in the world only saw staff when something went wrong. So she made sure nothing ever went wrong. She was almost at the door when she saw it, the board, just a glance. But something in her chest went very still. She stopped walking. A woman near the window noticed. Camilla Renzi, Aldo's sister, sharp-eyed and bored, tilted her head toward Nora with the particular cruelty of someone who has never once was worried about rent. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" Nora didn't answer. Camilla laughed, low and delighted, the way people laugh when they've found something to mock. She's staring at the chessboard like she understands it. She probably doesn't even know which piece is the king. A few quiet chuckles moved around the room. Nora should have kept walking. She had spent 10 years making herself invisible precisely so she would never again be in a room where people looked at her like this. But her eyes were locked on one piece. A rook, sitting exactly 4 squares from where it needed to be for Luca Ferraro to lose everything. Luca's hand hovered over that rook. Nora heard herself speak before she decided to. "If you move that rook, you're dead in 7. The room went silent in the particular way rooms go silent right before something interesting happens. Luca's hand stopped in midair. He studied the board first, the way a careful man studies anything before he reacts to it. Then he turned his head, slow, and looked at the maid standing near the door with an empty tray in her hands. "Excuse me?" Nora's pulse was loud in her own ears. Every instinct told her to apologize, lower her eyes, disappear back into the hallway. Instead, she said it a second time. "Move the rook, and in 7 moves, he mates you with the bishop and knight combination you haven't seen yet. It's already set up. He's been building it since move 11. Aldo Renzi's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Camilla wasn't laughing anymore. Luca studied Nora for a long moment. "Then show me," he said. "Sit." The room didn't breathe. Nora set down her tray and walked to the table like she had walked to 100 tournament tables before, back when she was 17 and ranked among the top junior players in the country. She sat. Aldo Renzi looked amused, then irritated, then, 7 moves later, deeply unamused, as Nora Vale, hotel maid, walked his king into a corner it could not escape and delivered checkmate with a knight he never saw coming. The room exploded into noise. Luca Ferraro didn't laugh. He watched Nora stand, straighten her uniform, and reach for her tray like nothing unusual had happened at all. "Wait," he said. "What's your name?" "Nora Vale." Luca nodded slowly, filing the name away the way men like him filed away everything, permanently, precisely, for later use. "You'll be hearing from me, Nora Vale." She left the suite with her tray of empty glasses and her heart slamming against her ribs, and she did not let herself feel anything close to triumph until she was 3 floors down, alone in a supply closet, her back against the wall, breathing like she'd just run a marathon. Because the truth was, she hadn't stopped in that doorway by accident. She hadn't taken this job by accident either. 10 years ago, her father, Daniel Vale, had been the quiet mathematical mind behind the accounting systems of several casinos, with deep, tangled roots in this family's business. He was careful, he was brilliant. He noticed patterns other people missed. 6 months before he died, he had started coming home distracted, sleepless, checking the locks on their apartment door twice before bed. He told her nothing. 3 weeks after his strange new habits began, he was found dead in an alley 2 blocks from his office. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. Nora, 17 years old and 2 months from a national junior chess championship, never played another tournament again. She believed her father had discovered something during his work for this family. Something that got him killed. She had taken the housekeeping job at this hotel 3 years ago, and waited for exactly the kind of opportunity that had just happened in that suite. She hadn't planned the chess match. But she had planned, for 3 long years, to eventually get close enough to learn the truth. The message arrived 2 days later. A car, black, unmarked, waiting outside the staff entrance at the end of her shift. Nora was brought to a townhouse study, lined with books Luca probably hadn't read and a chessboard he clearly had. "You embarrassed a very wealthy, very dangerous man in front of his sister 2 nights ago," Luca said, not looking up from the pieces he was arranging. "Do you understand what that cost me socially to enjoy as much as I did?" "I didn't do it for you," Nora said. "I know." His eyes lifted to hers, calm, assessing. "That's exactly why I'm interested." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of financial documents she didn't recognize. "I need someone who can see patterns other people can't," Luca said. "I'm offering you a position. Private strategic advisor. Better pay than housekeeping. Access to rooms you clearly already wanted access to, given how quickly you noticed that rook." Nora kept her face still. "Why would I want access to your rooms?" Luca almost smiled. "Because you didn't stop walking by accident, Miss Vale. People who stop by accident don't calculate mate in 7 in 4 seconds. For a moment, Nora considered denying it. Then she considered that lying to a man who noticed everything was a losing opening. "I want to understand how your world works," she said carefully. "That's all I'll say for now." "Fair enough. I don't need to know why yet. I need to know if you're good enough to be useful." "I'm good enough. Then we'll find out together." The weeks that followed reshaped her life. She was given an apartment closer to the family's operations. She was brought into rooms where men twice her age went quiet when she spoke, not out of mockery now, but because Luca had made it clear, without ever saying it outright, that underestimating Nora Vale was a mistake he would not tolerate twice. She sat beside him during negotiations, watching supply routes and payment structures laid out like opening theory on a board she was only beginning to learn. And slowly, Luca began asking her opinion before he made decisions. Not performatively. He would pause mid-sentence in a meeting, look at her, and wait. No one had ever done that before. Luca looked at her like her thoughts had weight. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, because it did not match the monster she had built in her head for 10 years, brick by patient brick. Monsters were not supposed to listen. One evening, 3 weeks into her new position, Luca found her in the townhouse library long after the rest of the staff had gone home, hunched over an old chessboard, replaying a game from memory. "You still play," he said. "Sometimes." He sat across from her without asking permission, the way he did most things, and began setting up his own pieces on a second board beside hers. "Play me." They played in silence for nearly 40 minutes, the only sound the soft click of pieces against wood. And somewhere in the quiet accumulation of moves, Nora realized she hadn't felt this calm in a decade. She won, eventually. Luca studied the final position. "You've been playing your whole life. I stopped for 10 years. Why start again? My father taught me. He died when I was 17. I stopped after that." Something shifted behind Luca's eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded, unexpectedly, like he meant it. "Are you?" The words left her sharper than intended. Luca looked at her carefully. "Should I not be?" She held his gaze and said nothing. For a moment the air between them felt dangerously honest. Then Luca reset the pieces, calm as ever. "Again, this time I won't go easy." She let the moment pass, but she didn't forget it. Over the following month, Nora built a careful double life inside the organization. By day, precise strategic advisor, earning a level of respect she'd never experienced in her adult life. By night, alone in her apartment, she pulled a small wooden box out from beneath a loose floorboard, the one thing she'd taken with her when her mother sold their old apartment years ago. Inside were her father's chess notebooks, dozens of them, filled with handwritten games in his careful, slanted script. She had read through them 100 times as a grieving teenager and found nothing but beautiful, meaningless games. But now, sitting at her kitchen table with a decade of pattern recognition sharpened by real stakes, she looked at them differently. Tucked inside the front cover of the oldest notebook was a single loose page she'd always assumed was scrap paper. On it, in her father's handwriting, was one line she'd never understood as a teenager. "The board is only a ledger if you know which side is white." She had memorized it without meaning to, the way children memorize things adults say that don't quite make sense yet. Sitting there now, older, sharper, she finally understood it as an instruction. White always moved first in her father's notation. If the games weren't games at all, then White's opening moves were the key, the starting reference point for whatever the rest of the sequence was meant to translate into. She spent 3 sleepless nights testing it, mapping White's first 5 moves in each notebook against dates, against currency figures, against nothing in particular, until the pattern locked into place. Her father hadn't been recording chess games. He'd been recording evidence. Financial transactions, encoded as chess moves, hidden inside a hobby no one would ever think to investigate. Her hands were shaking by the time she finished the first full decoded page. The numbers pointed to discrepancies. Funds moved from operational accounts into channels that didn't match anything on the official books, small enough individually to avoid notice, large enough collectively to represent millions. And every trail she managed to decode over the following 2 weeks led toward the same signature account structure. Not Luca's. Matteo Ferraro, Luca's uncle, the man who had raised him after his father died young, who sat beside him in every major meeting, universally regarded as the second most powerful man in the family and the most trusted. Nora stared at the name for a long time. It didn't fit the story she'd told herself for 10 years. She had built her adult life around the certainty that Luca Ferraro was the one responsible for her father's death. But her father's own evidence pointed somewhere else entirely. She told herself it didn't matter. Matteo could have been acting on Luca's orders. Luca could still be guilty, indirectly, even if his hands weren't the ones that ended her father's life in that alley. She told herself this every night for a week, and every night it felt a little less true. In the middle of all this, there were small moments she hadn't planned for. A night when one of Luca's men called her the help in front of the wrong people, and Luca corrected him so quietly, so precisely, that the man never made the mistake again. A morning when she found a small, expensive chess set waiting on her desk with no note attached, and she knew exactly who had left it there. She told herself these things meant nothing, that she was simply doing her job well. But that didn't explain the hours she spent one evening replaying their library game from memory, not analyzing his mistakes, but remembering the particular way he'd looked at her after losing, amused rather than wounded, like losing to her was its own kind of victory. She hated how much she liked being looked at that way. Some nights, lying awake with her father's notebooks spread across the table, she wondered if that was exactly what Luca intended. If this was strategy, if she was another piece being maneuvered into position. She hated that thought too, because some small, treacherous part of her didn't fully believe it anymore. One evening, late at her desk, Luca leaned in the doorway. "You should sleep. You should take your own advice." He crossed the room, looking over her shoulder at a shell company structure she'd finally untangled after 6 hours. "You see the whole board before anyone explains it to you. My father used to say most people only look at the piece they're moving. Real players look at the whole board before they touch anything. Smart man." He was. Her voice caught, just slightly, on the word was. "Tell me about him," Luca said, pulling a chair closer instead of leaving. Nora hadn't talked about her father, really talked about him, in years. But something about the quiet office, the late hour, made her want to. She told him about Sunday mornings over a chessboard, before either of them had eaten breakfast. About the 6 months before he died when he grew quiet and watchful in a way that terrified her. About the last conversation they had. An ordinary one, that she would have given anything to have back. Luca listened without interrupting, without offering empty comfort, just present, absorbing every word like it mattered. "He sounds like he loved you very much," he said finally. "He did. Because you looked like nobody's asked you about him in a long time," Luca added quietly, when she asked why he wanted to know. She didn't have an answer for that. She wasn't sure she trusted herself to give one honestly. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Luca asked her to retrieve a file from his private archive room, a locked space in the townhouse basement that even most of his inner circle wasn't permitted to enter. He trusted her with the code. She told herself that was simply strategic convenience. She found the file quickly. She should have left immediately. Instead, she stood there, alone, for the first time in 10 years with actual access to the truth, and searched for her father's name. It took almost an hour. The folder was thin, tucked between records that had nothing to do with it, as if someone had wanted it hidden, even from people who had every right to see it. Inside were surveillance photographs of her father, taken months before his death, meeting with an unfamiliar man in unmarked locations. Beneath the photographs, a handwritten note. "Daniel Vale believes M is diverting funds through the casino accounts, requesting protection. Confirm discrepancies, match his reports. Advise caution, M. Cannot know we're aware." The date was 3 weeks before her father died. Nora read the note 4 times before the words fully landed. Her father hadn't been hiding something from this family. He'd been warning them. Warning Luca specifically about his own uncle stealing from the organization, funneling money through the exact casino accounts Daniel Vale had been trusted to manage. Luca had known. He had suspected Matteo for years and had never had enough concrete proof to move against the man who had essentially raised him, without risking a war that could tear the family apart. Nora sat down on the cold concrete floor of that archive room and felt 10 years of certainty collapse beneath her like a bridge with rotted supports. She had spent a decade hating the wrong man. "I wondered when you'd find that folder." Nora turned. Luca stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. "You knew who I was from the beginning." "I recognized the name Vale the moment you gave it to me," Luca said, stepping into the room. "Your father sent me warnings for months before he died. I didn't act fast enough. I didn't have proof strong enough to move against my own uncle. Then Daniel Vale was dead, and I told myself it wasn't my fault. Some nights I still don't believe that." "You let me believe you killed him," Nora said, her voice unsteady. "You let me hate you." "I let you get close enough to find the truth yourself," Luca said, "because I needed someone who thinks the way your father thought. Because I wanted to know what kind of woman he'd raised. You should have told me. Would you have believed me?" "Maybe not," Nora said. "That still doesn't mean you got to decide I was better off believing you murdered him. That wasn't yours to decide for me." Luca was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "It wasn't. I told myself it was strategy. It was also easier than the alternative, which was telling you the truth and hoping you'd stay anyway." Nora stood, unsteady, 10 years of grief and certainty rearranging itself violently inside her chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we finish what your father started. Together, if you're willing." They spent the following days building something neither of them named out loud. Luca kept a plain wooden chess set in his private office now, worn at the edges, the kind two people used because they wanted to play, not because they wanted to be watched playing. One night, after a match that ended in a draw neither of them had seen coming, Luca reached across the board and covered her hand with his. "I need to say something," he said, "and I need you to let me finish. I recognized your name because your father tried to save this family, and some reckless part of me wanted to know if his daughter carried the same conviction," he said. "But somewhere between that first chess game and tonight, it stopped being about your father entirely and started being about you." Nora sat very still. "I came here to destroy you," she said quietly. "I need you to understand that. I know, and I let you believe I might have killed your father because I needed to know if you were capable of finding the truth on your own. That was its own kind of dishonesty. We're not exactly starting from clean ground, either of us. So what do we do with that?" "We keep playing," Luca said. "Honestly, this time." Nora looked down at their hands, still resting together over a half-finished chess game, and for the first time in 10 years, the ache in her chest wasn't grief. "Okay," she said softly. "Honestly, they didn't kiss that night. It was quieter than that. The particular intimacy of two people who had spent their whole lives being underestimated finally being fully seen by someone else. That fragile new understanding lasted exactly 4 days before Matteo forced their hand entirely. Nora had spent those 4 days finishing the last of her father's notebooks while Luca quietly tightened loyalty among the men he trusted, watching Matteo for any sign the investigation had been noticed. They both underestimated how closely Matteo had been watching them in return. She was working late in the townhouse study when the hallway lights flickered once, twice, then died. She heard boots on the stairs. Too many boots. Luca appeared in the doorway, his usual composure sharpened into something colder. "We need to move, Matteo. He's making his move tonight." Luca pulled her through a side passage out past old service corridors, distant shouting rising from the front of the house. They reached a reinforced side office lined with security monitors. Nora's eyes moved across the screens, watching Matteo's men position themselves at exits, at vehicles, at communication relays. She studied it for a long moment. "This isn't random," she said. "Look at the spacing. Every exit is covered except this one." She pointed to a service door on the east side, barely watched. "That's not a mistake. Nobody leaves a door that unguarded by accident unless they want you to think it's useless." "How do you know it isn't?" "Because he's spent his whole life making people believe the weak point is somewhere else. He's leaving us the move he wants us to see, which means the real answer is the one he thinks we'll dismiss." Luca's expression sharpened. "That door connects to the old wine cellar tunnel. Then that's not his blind spot. That's his exit." They moved fast, Luca relaying instructions through a secure channel, using Nora's read of the pattern to reroute defenses and funnel the coup's momentum toward the point she'd identified. It wasn't guns that turned the tide first. It was information. By the time Matteo reached the tunnel he'd kept lightly guarded specifically to preserve as his exit, he found it already sealed. Luca's loyal men positioned exactly where Nora had predicted, and Nora herself standing at a distance, near the comms relay, watching. Matteo stopped. "You, the maid, not anymore. Your father should have kept his mouth shut," Matteo said. No denial in his voice now, no pretense. He found things that weren't his to find. "He found the truth," Nora said. "You killed him for doing exactly what you're doing right now, taking something that wasn't yours." "It was never going to be handed to me," Matteo said. "I built half of what this family has. I raised that boy like my own son, and the moment his father died, everyone assumed the crown skipped straight to him, like blood matters more than competence. So you decided to take it by force." Luca stepped into the tunnel's mouth, flanked by 2 of his men. "You could have come to me, years ago. I would have listened. You never would have shared power," Matteo said. "Maybe. We'll never know now, will we?" Nora watched Matteo's eyes move between them, calculating, and she recognized the shift in his shoulders half a second before it happened, the particular stillness of a man reaching for a piece he wasn't supposed to still have. "Left hand," she said sharply. "Coat." Luca's men moved before Matteo's fingers closed around anything, and whatever was inside that coat was gone from his reach before he could finish the thought. For a long beat, nobody moved. Luca's eyes found Nora's, something raw passing between them. "You planned this whole coup like an opening," Nora said quietly to Matteo. "Strong development, aggressive positioning. But you assumed no one else could see the board the way you could." Matteo's shoulders dropped, the posture of a man recognizing checkmate before it was formally declared. Luca's men closed in. There was no dramatic struggle, just the quiet collapse of a plan beaten not by force but by foresight. The house was quiet again by dawn. Nora sat on the back steps of the townhouse, wrapped in a coat someone had given her hours earlier, watching the sky lighten over rooftops she'd once cleaned windows in from the outside. Luca found her there and sat beside her without asking. "You could have walked away the moment you found that folder," he said eventually. "Instead you stayed and helped me stop a war." "I didn't do it for you," Nora said, echoing the words she'd said to him weeks ago. Luca almost smiled. "I know." They sat in silence for a while, the sun catching the edges of the rooftops. "So what happens now?" Nora asked. "To me, to this." "I don't want you to leave," Luca said. "Not as an advisor who happens to also matter to me. Just stay. Sit across from me the way you have been. Tell me when I'm wrong. I'd rather have that than anything that looks better on paper." Nora studied him for a long moment. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I'm not doing it to stand quietly in the background of every important room you walk into. I've spent my whole life being invisible. I'm done with that. I want real access. Financial records, intelligence, a genuine voice in every decision that affects people who don't have the power to protect themselves. Not because you're being generous, because I've earned it, twice over, in the last month alone." "You have," Luca said simply. "I don't want to be your queen on a chessboard, Luca. I want to be the player sitting across from you." Luca held her gaze. "Then take the seat, and tell me when I'm wrong." Her father had hidden the truth in chess because he believed someone, someday, would know how to read the board. Nora finally had. Checkmate. If you were in Nora's position, would you have trusted Luca once you learned the truth, or would 10 years of certainty have been impossible to let go of? Did Matteo deserve any sympathy for spending 30 years building a family he was never allowed to lead? Or does that history excuse nothing he did? And when someone spends their whole life being overlooked, do you think real power comes from being given a seat at the table? Or from proving you never needed permission to sit down in the first place? Let me know what you think in the comments.